This is the SVBony ASI533MM Pro, and it is a monochrome cooled asphotography camera using the ASI533 monochrome sensor from Sony that is very well respected in the hobby. So this is effectively SVBony's budget answer to the similar cameras from ZW. For instance, the ZW ASI533MM Pro would be the equivalent to this, or something like on the Toptech side or other brands as well. And SVBony sent me this camera free of charge. I do believe I get to keep it in the end, so effectively I am being compensated for this review. That said, as usual, it's going to be a completely honest review. I have full editorial control. And yes, I do have a few things that are not so positive to say about this camera, so make sure to stay tuned to really understand everything about it. So first things first, let's talk about pricing. The reason why I wanted to check this camera out is because it is cheaper than cameras with equivalent sensors from ZW or Toptech. So for instance, the default price of the ASI version from ZW is around 1,000 US dollars, although it is apparently currently on sale to 900 US dollars. The price for this one, which is supposed to be equivalent, is 900 US dollars by default, but currently it is on sale for 630 US dollars and will be even cheaper if you want to buy it, and you buy it using one of my links down in the description with the Quiv coupon that gives you, I think, $20 off. So it is very much cheaper, like even on sale versus on sale, it is 170 US dollars cheaper than ZW, and default price versus default price is a difference of 100 US dollars. So it is not nothing, but are there compromises that you have to take if you buy the cheaper version from SVBony? The answer is yes, absolutely. But first, let me show you what was in the box. So we get, of course, the main camera in a very nice little SVBony case, which is always appreciated. And as far as I can tell, the back focus from the sensor to the flange of that M42 adapter here is 17.5 millimeters, just like normal ZW cameras. You can remove the T-ring at the front to get a 6.5 millimeters back focus with male threads. We also get the usual adapters like a USB 3 cable. We get a 1.25-inch eyepiece adapter if you want to do planetary with that camera, with like SCT telescopes, that kind of stuff. And we get the usual adapters to get 55 millimeters of back focus very easily with a 16.5 millimeters adapter and a 21 millimeter adapter. You can just put them together, add the camera at the end, and you'll have your 55 millimeters of back focus. No homework needed. You just do it and you're good. So the usual stuff. You also get some additional adapters, like this one I believe is M42 to M48 if you're using the camera without the 11 millimeters thick adapter there. Also M42 to, I believe, C adapter, again if you're using some weird lenses with the camera. You also have some spacers, plastic spacers, that you can use to adjust the back focus precisely. Always good to have, but we're getting used to getting those by default with cameras, so that's kind of like the bare minimum these days. We also have some kind of a stick with desiccant tablets, and you can actually remove a screw here if you ever get some dew within the camera and replace those desiccant tablets to get rid of that. So, you know, very similar to the QHY technique actually of doing so. So all of that, it tracks, it makes sense. I'm good with that for now. We also have like a cleaning cloth that I would never use. The window, by the way, is an anti-reflective window. It is not UV-IR cut, so it's just AR, and you'll need to use a UV-IR cut filter or narrowband filters, for instance, with this camera. It also came with a 12 volt 5 amps power adapter, so always good to have. And a paper manual in multiple languages. That's actually pretty nice to have. It does contain stuff like the power consumption depending on the temperature delta you want to achieve on your camera versus ambient temperature. So that's this chart here. It also contains like a chart of quantum efficiency with some specs, also a dark current specification, and instructions on how to use the camera with Nina, for instance. So it's always good to have that paper format if you're getting started, you're not familiar with everything. That's all nice and good. What is missing though is any type of read noise curve compared to gain, where the unity gain is, how does everything work. It's kind of not very obvious. So of course I did a measurement with the SharpCap sensor analysis utility, and we'll have a look in a moment. I want to give a few comments on the actual body of the camera. I mean, obviously, the first thing that you notice is that the sensor, it's the IMX533 sensor as usual, so it is a square sensor. A lot of people don't like it. I personally love that kind of stuff because then I don't have to really care that much about the rotation of the sensor and how that affects the field of view. I mean, to some extent I do, but much less than with a rectangular sensor. And it has 9 megapixels roughly resolution. It's the default IMX533, which is an excellent sensor all around. But I would say one of the biggest weaknesses of this camera compared to ZW is that you have the USB input, makes sense. You have the power input, makes sense. There's no USB output. So with ZW cameras or TaubeTech cameras or most cooled astrophotography cameras these days, you expect to have a USB 2 hub there available to connect other equipment. So especially for a monochrome camera where you expect to be using an electronic filter wheel, it's nice to have like an output, a couple of USB ports as output that act as a USB hub to like your filter wheel on one side, to your focuser on the other side that don't require any like high speeds or anything like that. This is missing from this camera, and in my opinion, this is a very large overlook by SVBony. They really should have included that, especially with a monochrome camera, like color camera, where you don't need the electronic filter wheel. Like, okay, I can understand it, but monochrome, I think it's really necessary and it would be really, really nice to have. Now, once I received the camera, there is also something that I tested immediately in a temperature-controlled room, which was the cooling capability of the camera, because in the specifications, it doesn't say the temperature delta compared to the ambient air temperature that you can bring your sensor to. If you're not familiar with astrophotography or you're considering this as your first camera, cooling your sensor to something like 0 degrees, -5 degrees Celsius, -10 degrees Celsius is extremely helpful in decreasing the level of thermal noise that we get in the camera sensors. And thermal noise is basically the camera misunderstanding heat as light. And therefore it adds up noise in your image that you really want to avoid. And most manufacturers, they publish a specification of like -35 degrees below ambient or -40 degrees below ambient. This is in Celsius, and if a manufacturer tells you that it supports up to 35 degrees below ambient, it just means that if the ambient temperature is 30 degrees Celsius, I'll be able to cool the camera sensor all the way down to -5 degrees Celsius. I'm used to cameras publishing a spec of or a delta temp of 35 degrees Celsius below ambient, but usually I can push them further than that. Most of them, they actually manage or nearly manage 40 degrees below ambient without too much trouble. This one, no. I tried 35 degrees below ambient, so I set my room temperature to exactly 30 degrees. I cooled the camera to -5, and yes, it did manage, but it was really the cooler power was at full swing, almost 100% the whole time. This camera does seem to struggle in terms of cooling performance a bit more than ZW cameras or TaubeTech cameras that I've tested, in that with those, typically I can go to -35 and I still have some headroom to go even further than that, below ambient temperature. That's not the case with this one. Now, the second thing that I did with this camera, I checked the read noise curve, and I also checked how dark frames looked, because I had heard that there was some bending issues with older versions of this camera that they have now fixed. And what I'm getting here is the fixed version. So I want to double check that and show you how it looks like. Once that's done, we'll come back outside to put the camera on this equipment, and then I'll show you the results of an imaging session that I had with it. Okay, so first let's look at the read noise graph that I got from SharpCap. And by the way, connecting the camera to SharpCap or to Nina was very easy. It was just downloading a few drivers on the website, installing that, and we're good. So basically, if you go on SVBony's website, you go to support, software and drivers, and in there, for me, it was just going to the Windows part, and I just needed to install this driver here, SVBony cameras. I also installed the ASCOM driver just for the fun of it, but it's not really necessary. And then in SharpCap, you can select the camera directly, and in Nina, it also appears as a native camera, nothing to do. On something like StellarMate or K-Stars/EcoSpace systems, SVBony CCD worked out of the box. I had nothing to do. I did have to upgrade my StellarMate to the latest version, but otherwise no issues whatsoever on that front. Now let's have a look at the actual read noise that I measured with this camera and the gain values. And you can see that looking at the gain values, electrons per ADU, the gain 100 here is basically 1 electron per ADU. This is exactly like the ZW version. So you can see this is the ZW graph, and gain 100 is indeed the unity gain for ZW. And at gain 100, we also get down to a read noise of 1.5 electrons that will gradually go down to 1 electron as you increase the gain. And the switch between this low conversion gain and high conversion gain happens at gain 100. Together with the recovery of the dynamic range. So how does it look like on the SVBony camera? It's exactly the same thing. So you can see at gain 100, we go from 13.1 stops of dynamic range immediately back to 13.5, which is very close to the initial one at gain 0 of 13.75. And at the same time, my read noise is 1.46, which is exactly in line with what ZW has as well. And it's halved, more than halved compared to the read noise at gain 0. This is exactly what we expect. And then at gain 450, just like the ZW camera, we're down to roughly 1 electron of read noise. So effectively the way that SVBony built this camera and the gain curve around this camera, it's a complete copy, it's a pure copy of the ZW camera, which, you know, is a good thing because the ZW camera with the IMX533 sensor is very popular and works very well with this kind of profile. So everything is cool and peachy here. My recommendation, just like with the ZW version, is to set your gain to 100 and forget about it. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's have a look at some dark frames. So I took a couple of dark frames, 300 seconds long, with the camera, and I'm used to having 533 images that are without any amp glow, but there is indeed a tiny bit of amp glow at the top left. Here you can see here, that little thing here. And indeed in practice, as you'll see later in this video, there was no impact on the images at all. And I do not notice any very visible banding with the camera. This looks very smooth and very nice here. Maybe if you squint a bit, you might see some banding, but I really don't see it and I don't think it would bother us. And the second dark frame, I took it after placing the camera in a cardboard box just to make sure that this amp glow was not just a light leak. And no, the amp glow was still there, so definitely not a light leak here. So overall, even with that tiny bit of amp glow on the top left, this is a very clean sensor. No problem as far as I can tell. It looks to be a carbon copy of the ZW camera at this stage. Okay, so now let's have a look quickly on the rooftop balcony at the camera connected to the telescope. Here we have the test setup that I'll be using with this SVBony ASI533MM Pro. And I have the usual stuff. I just replaced the camera that I had there, that was, I believe, a ZW camera, the ASI533MM Pro, and I replaced it as is with the SVBony. The back focus effectively seems to be exactly the same as with the ZW camera. And really, the only problem that I have with the setup is the lack of a USB hub on the camera. I used this particular setup because I have enough USB ports on my control center at the top to deal with it compared to my other setup that doesn't have as many USB ports. And because I'm using a filter drawer, I don't have it as bad as most people, but with a monochrome camera, I think the expectation is that you would be using an electronic filter wheel. And I'm not, so I don't really need that USB port. You can see I need one for the focuser, one for the guide camera, and it would be one for the electronic filter wheel. And I cannot do any of those via a camera USB hub, and that would be really, really convenient. And it is something that ZW has done for years, TaubeTech has done pretty much from the beginning, and it's lacking here, and I don't like it. I will also say that I actually already used this one night, and I cooled it to the usual temperature that I use in the Tokyo summers, which is -5 degrees Celsius, because usually at night it's around 30 degrees Celsius, the air temperature, and so it's possible with pretty much all of the cameras I've had to cool it to -5. And while the SVBony camera achieved that without any real issues, it was at 97% power used while it did that on the camera, and throughout the night it went down to maybe 90% or so, whereas I had an APS-C size format camera from ZW running in parallel, and a TaubeTech 585 sensor camera running also in parallel and being cooled down right next to this one, and they were using roughly 80% of their power at the very start, and then we're gradually going down to roughly 70%. So you can see that the cooling solution of the SVBony camera here is definitely not as good as either the TaubeTech or the ZW camera solutions. So those, I would say, are the most glaring issues with this particular camera. That said, I have taken some images with this through very thin clouds and not ideal conditions, but I was able to take a few hours of data in H-alpha using one of the SVBony narrowband filters for H-alpha, and we can look at the results of how I did the calibration of the frames, how the calibrated frames look like, and how the final stacked result looks like as well. And so let's go inside to have a look. Before we do that, if you like this kind of video, don't forget to like the video. It really helps YouTube notice the video and broadcast it to more people. And while you're at it, and if you're new to the channel, you may want to click that subscribe button. And you can also leave a comment if you've used this camera or used similar cameras, whether you'd be considering getting this particular camera. Of course, I'll have the links down in the description together with a small coupon that you can use to get a lower price on the camera. If you want to support me more at no cost to you and you're planning on buying anything from SVBony or Amazon, Agena, Highpoint, etc., if you do so after clicking on one of the links that I have down in the description, it helps me out and it doesn't cost you anything. And if you want to help more directly, to really completely directly support the channel, you can join my Patreon as a paid member or join the channel as a member using the join button next to the subscribe button. The Patreon, I have the link down in the description, and it is thanks to you, my Patreon supporters and channel members, that this channel still exists. So thank you so much. Anyway, with that, let's go inside. Okay, let's have a look at the results of my imaging on the Ring Nebula. I took 51 exposures of 5 minutes each through the SVBony H-alpha filter that I also got from SVBony and reviewed on the channel. I'll have the link down below and also maybe up above if you're interested. And I also calibrated my images with bias frames and with flat frames, but that's it. I did not use dark frames. I've mentioned in another video that unless the sensor requires it, I wouldn't be using dark frames. And this sensor, despite that tiny bit of amp glow, doesn't seem like it requires it. I had set, of course, the gain to 100, as I mentioned, and the offset was set to a very low value of, I believe, 7. And because I saw that really low values of offset are perfectly fine with this camera. Anything between 5 and 10 worked very well. After that, you're starting to waste some dynamic range for no reason. So that's what I did. This is a single 300-second exposure, bias calibrated and flat calibrated, with the Ring Nebula at the center. And you can see, to me, it looks very, very smooth. Nothing to really check on. I did not do any processing on it besides an auto stretch. Maybe if I squint, this corner might be slightly brighter, but I think it's more a trick of the imagination rather than anything else. So as you see, the amp glow that we saw together doesn't seem to have any real life impact on the image. And again, I did not do any dark calibration, only bias and flat frames. And we have the Ring Nebula here at the center. Cool. So that's a single frame, right? What about the stack? So the stack looks like this, again, on the Ring Nebula. Those 51 frames, by the way. The quality of the sky was garbage, absolute and complete garbage. So it's not the best result I could get, especially from here in Tokyo, but it is what it is. And we have some stacking artifacts. And yes, there is this corner there that's lost within the stacking artifacts does have a tiny bit of residual amp glow. If I wanted to get rid of this, I would need to take dark frames, but I'm not going to take dark frames just for that little thing here that's going to get cropped off anyway. So not a big deal to me at all. And the sensor does look, you know, the stack, I don't see any bending. It looks very smooth and very easy to process. And in fact, I did a very quick processing on that H-alpha data with the Ring Nebula here. Let me remove the preview so we have a better look. And it looks quite nice, very smooth, nothing to do. The nebula, and we're starting to see the outer shell becoming visible. We have all of those details. It looks, honestly, quite nice. I don't see any issues with the camera. It seems to be overall, to me, a complete clone of the ZW cameras with two major downgrades. One downgrade is the lack of a USB hub at the back. It would be really nice to have two USB 2 ports there as a USB hub. There is space, I think, here, but maybe there's no space on the board or something like that. But that's a very big negative, in my opinion. And the second negative with this camera, compared to the ZW versions, or versions from other manufacturers as well, is the cooling capability, which is clearly one notch below the other cameras from the competition. But at the same time, if this camera is on sale and the ZW camera is not on sale, there is a $270 difference between the two. Even with both on sale, which at the time of recording of the video, they both are, it's still $170 price difference. It is not nothing. Are you okay with, not having the USB hub at the back of the camera and having slightly less cooling performance? For that price difference, that's really up to you to decide. Overall, I would say if you're on a budget, you like the 533 sensor because it is an excellent general purpose sensor and you want a monochrome camera, then this can be a very good choice for you. If you have slightly higher budget, I think the ZW version, the TaupeTech version, are simply better due to the USB hub and the better cooling performance. The TaupeTech version also has an integrated dew heater. So there you go. This is really an example of low cost budget. Budget, everything's relative. Camera costs less than the competition, but in this case does not quite equal the competition. But it's close. And I'm sure that if you buy this and you have, already an external USB hub, whatever, you will have no issues, whatever, with this camera. What do you think of the camera? Would that be something you'd be tempted by, or you'd simply go for the safety of the red brand or the blue brand? Or QHY or any of the other brands that are available? Or if you're really trying to save a penny, would you actually consider this camera as well? Let us know down in the comments if you have any other notes, other cameras you'd like me to test, other stuff you'd like me to address. Let me know down in the comments. Random questions are appreciated as well. And if you want to support the channel at no cost to you and you're planning on buying anything from Agena, Amazon, Highpoint, First Light Optics, AstroShop EU, if you do so after clicking the links that I have in the description, it will help me out. And of course, you can always become a Patreon supporter or a channel member, the join button or the Patreon link down in the description. Thank you so much, guys. But most important of all, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget whenever you can to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.